So you've got all of that knowledge and all of that life experience and all these skills and all these levels of development have accumulated to the point where you're back now at the ground of being. You're not just wrapped up in egoic consciousness like 99% of humanity. Well, maybe not 99, but it's pretty high. Hi everyone, kind of a fun episode today. I'm very busy right now, so it's going to be fun, quite laid back, quite short, I think, although we'll see how it happens. If I get talking, it might be longer than that. Today we're going to be talking about, are babies enlightened? Are they moral? Are they sort of the models of what we should strive towards as humans, babies? Is that the goal? And the reason I'm asking this question is because it seems, especially in certain circles, it seems like we sort of idealize babies. And it sounds very silly when you actually say it. But this is what people do. People talk about, their spontaneity. They talk about their presence. They talk about their self-expression. They express themselves with no barrier, no filter. They're not using alcohol to like loosen up to overcome their inhibitions. They just express themselves. They just play. They're just present. They're just alive. They're just looking at everything with wonder. And my basic point of view on this is that on one hand, that is completely wrong, but on the other hand, there's something very true that we're tapping into, and that's why seeing babies do what they do gives us joy, because there's something very interesting and important going on there. So let's pick this apart a little bit. My basic view is that babies are not the goal. It's not what we're working towards. If you're following along with this channel, you're reading my articles, you're doing some of the practices I recommend, like shadow work and meditation and all kinds of other things, you might have this idea that, oh, well, I'm looking to become more developed. I'm looking to become more spontaneous, more present, more alive, more self-expressive, more myself. I'm trying to understand myself. So since babies do all of these things, apparently do all these things, well, that's the goal. That's what we're striving to do here. There's a few enormous problems with this, but there's one very simple critique of this. And I'm coming at this critique because I've studied human development. I've probably studied 10 or 15 or maybe 20 models of human development in all its different guises, from moral development, social development, cognitive development, values development, and so on. And the basic critique is that when we think of a real, enlightened, admirable human being, a moral human being, a hero in our culture, people like Gandhi, Martin Luther King, people who have achieved great things in the world. These people are basically at levels of development that you can only get to when you're an adult. Babies are at ground zero in their development. And I don't just mean, the basics like looking after themselves, which is obviously a thing, but things like moral development, cognitive development, ego development, and so on, they haven't even done the very basics. There is at least half a dozen stages to go through. It depends where you draw the line, but there's at least half a dozen stages to go through until you start to reach these sort of selfless, altruistic, compassionate levels of development. We cannot invert that. We can't just say, oh well, we start here and then we go up, we're growing through the levels of development, and then the goal is to get back here to the starting point as a baby, an adult baby kind of idea. That is, it's very naive, and it's not right at all. What we often do with babies is we look at them because we see the lack of ego, the lack of like this identity, the lack of like desire for power and control and whatever, and a lack of just that sort of egotistical energy, for want of a better word. And we think, oh well, they're moral and they're enlightened and they're compassionate and they're unconditionally loving. The thing is that babies do not have a sense of identity. They don't even know who they are. Like, that's why they are so spontaneous and uninhibited, because they don't have this separate sense of identity that we do. And I don't mean that in like an enlightened sense. I mean that in they are pre-ego. They are pre-identity. They're not post-identity, post-ego. They are pre-ego, pre-identity. That's why there's this spontaneity, there's this presence, there's this lack of inhibition, because they haven't even got to the stage where they have an identity yet. So they don't understand themselves as a human. Like, they don't understand that they have their own inner world. They are a certain person that was born in a certain place at a certain time. They are this many, weeks, months, years old. They can't understand even that basic stuff about being a person. They don't understand that. So how can you claim that they look out on the world and they see everyone with love and they understand everyone and all this? The amount of perspective taking that high morality actually requires is about 5 levels or 6 levels above where an infant is, a very young infant. So from a developmental point of view, that is simply not, it's not a feasible explanation for how babies work. So you might ask, well, how is it that babies seem like that? If it's not really the case, how is it they seem like that? And this is my explanation for it. My explanation for it is based on Suzanne Cook-Greuter's work, who's an ego development expert that her work is very inspiring to me and it's very clarifying. I've actually written an article on her stages of development. I would highly encourage you to read that article. I'll link to it in the description. Now, her basic argument for how the whole developmental curve unfolds as we go from being an infant, being at very low levels of development where we don't even have a sense of identity, let alone an egoic identity, let alone a post-egoic identity. Her basic model is that when we're very, very young and we don't, we can't look after ourselves, we don't have a sense of identity, we don't have a sense of time, we can't understand the world in any way, we are identified with the ground of being. In other words, we are kind of enlightened. The key difference is that we're not identified in a conscious way. We are unconsciously identified with the ground of being, with pure beingness, pure consciousness. We are unconsciously identified with that. And that's why there's this spontaneity, there's this sort of lovingness that comes through, there's this sort of lack of judgment. It's just pure, clean beingness, pure, clean awareness. Obviously, you can't see that awareness because you can't see their own experience of that awareness because it's a subjective experience that only you can have in yourself. But you can sort of sense that. Even people who aren't spiritual, who've never don't know a thing about Buddhism or any other spiritual school, sense this. And this is why it comes across the way it does, because there's a real lack of ego there. The difference is that they are identified with pure consciousness, of pure awareness, pure beingness, the ground of being, in an unconscious way. There's not a person there. There's not like a self-reflexive consciousness saying, oh, I thought I was this person, but I'm actually not. I'm pure beingness. And so is everyone else in the world. That is not a thing. The baby doesn't have a sense of identity in the most fundamental, basic way that you could possibly imagine as an adult. And I bet it's actually quite hard to imagine not having that. And so they can't understand that they are actually identified with the ground of being, because there is no reference point and they don't have the mental machinery required. Now, as we develop through all these stages and we get, if we go far enough in our development, that more sort of post-egoic, true morality, true sort of compassion, true service, true love in the world, not just, expressed in this sort of diffuse, unchanneled way like a baby does. When it's actually channeled into the world to help people, and it comes across in how you relate to people and people can sense it from you, you are now reaching the point where you are back to the ground of being, but you've gone through all of this development. You've understood yourself. You've developed a sense of identity. You've been to school. You've developed how to interact in the world, how to look after yourself, how to get around. You've developed skills. You've looked out across the world and you've seen what's happening on this earth, and you've seen that people are at all these different levels of development, and these levels of development are clashing with each other all the time. Only after all of that can you look out, and that's just a tiny short summary. Only after that are you able to look out and have compassion for other people. And you are now identified with the ground of being in a conscious way. So you've got all of that knowledge and all of that life experience and all these skills and all these levels of development have accumulated to the point where you're back now at the ground of being. You're not just wrapped up in egoic consciousness like 99% of humanity. Well, maybe not 99, but it's pretty high. You're now back to the ground of being, but you have all this context and you have the adult capacity to actually act on that in the world in a deliberate, channeled way. It's conscious identity with the ground of being. It's not unconscious like the baby. That's why there's something very admirable, if I can say that, about babies and infants who are pre-egoic, because deep down I think we know that there is something very pure in there, and it's because it's actually who we truly are, whether we know that or not. It appeals to us. It's kind of like an archetype for what is possible for us. The difference being that for us as adults, we're not regressing back. We are going this way. We're up here. We're actually way up here. We're not down here with the baby. We've gone through all of this and we're back. We're back at the ground of being, but we're back way up here as adults, as adults with an identity that we have seen beyond and seen through, not the other way around. So I think both sides of the coin are important. Recognizing that on one hand, babies are not moral and enlightened and maybe as self-expressive as we think because of all the reasons I've given there. But at the same time, that spontaneity, that sense of liberation, that sense of selflessness, that sense of just pure presence it's concealing something that is very important, and it's actually the kind of the goal, if you like, of all development. I also like to think that I was having a conversation about this with my girlfriend the other day, and we're getting quite, really thinking about this topic. And I said to her, what would be the point of life, of human life, if as a baby we were at the top? We're born and we've got it all. To me, it would not make any sense. To me, fundamentally, life is about learning. It's about challenge and learning and growth. And not just like learning maths or learning, languages or an instrument or whatever. I mean, learning how life works, how we work, learning fundamental lessons about what it means to be human. And if you were born as a baby and that was it, there was no more learning to do because you'd sort of reached the top, what would be the point? Why would we be born? To me, it doesn't make any sense. The whole point of life is that it's a journey. It's a journey up of ascension. And so, as a necessary corollary to that, we start at the bottom. We start at stage 1, stage 0 in our development, and we slowly work through all these stages of development until we undo all of that and we come back to who we actually truly are, beyond our egoic identity that we need to function in the world. So I hope those thoughts have maybe illumined this topic for you if you're interested, or maybe confused by it like I was for a while. I didn't really see how these things could fit together. I think this is a good approximation at how it might work. Alright, do read the articles that I've linked to in the description, and once again, thanks for watching. I will be back soon for more. Take care.